History of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants, who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we gotta figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're gonna rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote-unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately, the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness, and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. No more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well, right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon, the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped because the divide and conquer had begun to work, right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor white folks they got to keep these black people in line. And so that divide and conquer gets initiated in the colonies. Rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. Fast forward to the Civil War era. And you have, I'm from the South, right? My people, the elite in my part of the country, right, actually announced that the reason they wanted to break away from the Union and possibly go to war with their brothers and sisters to the north was in order to maintain slavery and white supremacy. They said that at the time. We lie about it now. And we say it had nothing to do with that. But of course, at the time, they didn't have any shame about it, so they just said it openly. Right? The vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, said that the cornerstone of the new government was the great truth that the Negro is not the equal of the white man. So that's the reason the Confederacy was formed and existed. But here's the trick. If I'm rich and I want to go to war to protect my ownership in other human beings, my property, but you're poor and you don't own any enslaved people, why the hell would you go fight to protect my stuff? Because I'm a rich person, I'm not going to fight. Rich people don't go to war, right? Rich people get poor people to go to war for them, whether it's in 1860 or whether it's during the 1960s or whether it's today, right? Rich folks get doctors to write notes for them that say that they have heel spurs and that's why they can't go to Vietnam. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, you can Google that shit because he's sitting in the White House right now, right? Well, I can't go fight. I have heel spurs. Send some poor kids to do that for me, please. Right? So that's been a long-standing tradition. So the rich have to figure out a way to convince the poor to go fight for them. But that's a hard thing. That's like a hard sell, right? Like, how the hell, why would you do that? Why would you go fight to protect my property rights when you don't own anything? The only way you would do it is if that rich person comes to you and says, hey, listen, you gotta go fight. Because we got to maintain our way of life, because if these people get free, they're going to take your jobs. No, fool, they already got your job. That's how it works, right? Because if I'm white and I got to charge you $1 a day to work on the farm, but you can get a black person to do it for nothing because you own them. Guess who got the job? Free got the job, right? So in a sense, poor white folks would have been better off joining with black folks to overthrow the slave system that would have raised the wage floor of all working people. But they got tricked by rich white men telling them that their enemies were black and brown. Fast forward to the 1930s. And you have white labor leaders. They're not even the elite, right? The labor leaders are not the elite, but they're the elite within the labor movement. And even they had fallen for it at this point. So they didn't want to integrate their unions. And they would say things like, well, we can't have black people and Mexicans and Chinese folks in our unions because if we do that, it's going to reduce the professionalism of our craft. We have to maintain the integrity of our profession. No, fool, you need more people in the damn union is what you need. And if you don't let those folks in, guess what happens when you go out on strike? Who is the boss going to use to replace you? They're going to replace you with the very same black and brown folks that you didn't want to work next to, right? And so at the end of the day, and then you're going to blame them for taking your job rather than the white rich dude for giving it to them, right? Divide and conquer. Telling not rich white folks that their enemies are black and brown. And now we fast forward to the president. We got the president of the United States becoming president on the basis of that same rhetoric. Telling not rich white folks that the reason they don't have a job is because Mexicans took a whole history.
Race. Erasure. We've seen it happen before. When black people were brought from Africa over here, forced to be here, they erased our culture from us. They took our religion away. They took our names away. They took our heritage, everything that related us to Africa. They took it away and replaced it with Western culture. That's what you're doing right now in education. When you look at the AP classes that are taught right now in the state of Florida, you have Chinese language and culture, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Latin, and Spanish. But you can't have African American studies. I have a huge problem with this. And this is a board that was created and cultivated with certain expertise and experience. Henry Louis Gates Jr. was a part of this. This isn't just some thing that they threw together at the last minute. It is put together to teach you about us and who we are through arts and literature, as you were saying, science, civil rights, political science, geography. There's so much more to it. And if every other culture can be taught except for black culture, that's racism.
That's right. We stop calling ourselves people of color. They're using that against us. By calling ourselves people of color and we stop using black, we're helping to extinguish our voice in the public conversation. Because nobody's hearing black no more. Nobody's hearing American or African no more. Most black people, when they describe themselves, what do they say? I'm a person of color, people of color. By doing this, you're lumping yourselves up with the Latinos, the Arabs, the East Indians, the Native Americans, the homosexuals, the women. Here's the problem with that. Once they get us, let's call ourselves people of color, which they've already had. Let's say 2 years, right? For 2 years, most black people have stopped identifying as black. They now say people of color. They're going to get to a point where you're completely identified with all these other non-white people who can't stand you any more than the Caucasian. And then you know what they're going to do? They're going to flip all these other people of color against your interests. Let me give you an example of how they're doing it right now. There's surveys being carried out across America where they're asking other people of color, reds, yellows, browns, poor whites, what do you think about reparations for black people? This is what they're doing right now. It's happening now. And guess what the Asians are saying? I don't think they need reparations. America isn't racist. What do you think the East Indians are saying? I don't think they need reparations. America isn't racist. What do you think the Native Americans and the European Jews are saying? I don't think they need reparations. America isn't racist. So the same people you identify with as people of color, when questions come up about your issues and your agenda, they can cancel it. Why? Because all the other people of color who you now identify with have taken a vote and said, y'all don't need reparations. Let me give you another example. Let's say you have a child, your son, we got black boys in public schools in Nashville, they're catching all kind of hell. Special ed hell, ADHD hell, psychiatric med hell, right? You say this school is racist. It's you and 5 other black mothers. This school is racist. You black father, black. This school is racist. This is what they're going to do. They're going to have a meeting of parents of color. Look at this now. It's a black issue, but you don't call yourself black no more. You've identified with your enemies of other color. They're going to call people of color, and they're going to talk to all the people of color. And they're going to say, do y'all think we're targeting the boys of color? You're not targeting the Arabs. You're not targeting the Latinos. You're not targeting the East Indies. You're targeting black. But because we handcuffed ourselves into this new identity of people of color, whenever they want to suffocate the black voice, all they got to do is ask the other people of color, what do you think about it? And we're done. Stop calling yourself a person of color. Be black. We better stop and change that public narrative back, especially now with the migrant crisis. They're going to suffocate the hell out the black agenda.
And we saw such a passionate and compassionate and empathetic, like, race of people that shoot another foot. I'm like, hell yeah, give them reparation.
Yep.
Hell yeah, give them like whatever it is.
Yep.
Like,
nobody speaks for us.
And
we keep saying black and brown.
Mm-hmm.
When have you heard brown people speak about blacks? They don't.
No,
they don't. Black and brown. Every black. Why you can't just say black? Because we have been bullied into feeling uncomfortable, only articulating our own issues. Black people are the only people who don't feel comfortable just fighting for black issues. Jews only fight for Jews. Latinos only fight for Latinos. Arabs only fight for Arabs. Mexicans only fight for Mexicans. Black people fight for everybody. And here's the Achilles heel of that mindset. If you're going to make everybody else's issue as important as your own, why should we care about your issue? By bringing them in, you automatically demote the seriousness of your issues. Multiculturalism was a trap the whole time. And one of the reasons I say multiculturalism was a trap the whole time, did you know Mexicans were once legally considered white in this country? Did you know East Indians were once legally considered white in this country? Did you know the Japanese sued in court to be white in this country, but they lost? Did you know Arabs are considered white right now in this country? Look at this. People of color? Harold, how is this a genuine people of color when every group in this people of color group used to be considered white and wish they could again be considered white? So why would you unite with them? They're using our self-hate and our love of outsiders to trap us into a corner where we can't crawl out of. That's dirty. It's a trap, the multicultural trap. We gotta go black to all black everything. I've been pushing it. Garvey said it 100 years ago. There's nothing new about it. But black people better wake up to it right now because it's on our front door now.
the pride that's associated with being black, like, I feel like the brainwashing is ran too deep.
It is ran too deep. Yeah.
I think it's ran too deep, and everybody said, like, everybody can make it. Like, you know what I mean?
You ain't taking everybody.
You ain't taking everybody.
And if you try to, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
You can't take everybody. In fact, if you were to ask me to guesstimate, right, you have about 40 to 50 million Africans in America. Continental Africans included, because as a Pan-Africanist, we all want. Of that 50 million Africans in America, I'm going to say maybe 5 million. I'm going to give you 10%. 90% of us are completely useless, right? Of that 90%, 60% of them are too religious to objectively evaluate our political, social, economic condition and do something about it. The Christ out Christian, I'm not saying anything wrong with Christian. I'm talking about the person who's so Christian that they've lost all connection to reality. You're so Muslim, you've lost all connection to reality. You're so Hebrew, so Jehovah Witness, so Seventh-day Adventist, you've lost all connection to reality. So 60% are gone. Because most of those religions, excluding the Hebrews, most of those religions teach colorblindism, right? The Christian church indoctrinates all their followers. God don't see color. The masjid, I was raised Orthodox Muslim, I know. God don't see color, you feel me? So 60% of us feel that embracing an African first consciousness is against God, which basically means redeeming black people is against God. You see that? If I can't fight for my people alone, then what you're saying is God isn't interested in African redemption. Because the only way African redemption happens is if black people focus on themselves. So you got 60% religious. You got another 20%, they are straight up economic opportunists. Do you feel me? They don't give a shit.